Once upon a tall tale. The Old Story, Told Wrong, by Morgan Olson. Once Upon a Tall Tale, Season 0, Episode 1. Someone always tells the old story wrong. They say it was Armenian, or Georgian, or just old enough that no one feels responsible for it anymore. A boy goes to a city with a name that keeps changing. He spends his family's money on women who are beautiful in a way that costs him every time he looks. When the money runs out, the city keeps him anyway. That's usually where the teller laughs and says something about learning a lesson. No one ever agrees on what the lesson was. The version that gets told now skips the moral. The city isn't a place, it's a sight. The women are illusionists. The boy isn't a fool so much as impatient. Someone always adds that the curse is the part that makes you stay. Someone else says that's bullshit, that people just don't know when to quit once they've figured out how to make rent without a boss. That's the version people like. It sounds modern. It sounds earned. What never makes it into the telling is the part where the boy chose. Tellers skip it because it complicates the lesson. Listeners skip it because they prefer their lessons clean. But every version of the story has a quiet second half nobody talks about. The first half is what the city did to the boy. The second half is what the boy did about it. 2. The Hedge House. Devin Oakfor didn't grow up around spells the way rich kids did, the ones who talked about foundation forms and wore their wards like jewelry. He grew up around work, around things that were supposed to function. His father, Cantor Oakfor, always had his hands stained with something. Ink from old seals, soot from burned paper, resin from cracked charms older than they had a right to be. The house smelled like boiled herbs and warm metal and whatever cheap solvent it took to make an ancient blessing stick one more season. They didn't make talismans in that house. They kept them from dying. People brought them in wrapped in towels like injured birds. A garden ward with a hairline fracture. A door charm that had started letting in drafts and arguments. A goblin repellent plate, half joke, half prayer, that someone swore used to work before the raccoons got bold. Cantor would set each thing on the table, squint at it like it was misbehaving, and charge the client what they could pay without breaking them. High magic is for people who can afford to be wrong, Cantor said once, not bitter, just matter of fact. We don't get that luxury. Devin learned fast, not the big gestures. There weren't any. He learned how to listen to an object the way you listen to a machine that's about to fail. He learned which cracks were cosmetic and which ones meant the whole thing would blow its seal and sour the room. Mostly, he learned patience, because patience was what hedge-magic ran on when it ran out of power. Then, one afternoon, he picked up a charm Cantor had been sweating over. A warm stone talisman for an old woman's knees, nothing impressive. And the thing filled the way a kettle fills when you forget to watch it. Not with Devin's energy. He didn't feel anything leave him. He just felt the air change, a slight pressure shift, like a window had opened somewhere in the house. Cantor looked up too quickly. "Put it down," he said. Devin did, confused. The charm kept humming for a moment after, like it hadn't gotten the memo. Cantor stared at him longer than was comfortable, then looked away like staring might make it worse. "Don't do that for people," he said. "Not yet." Why? Cantor wiped his hands on a rag that would never be clean again. Because the minute the world sees you can do something for free, it starts charging you for it. 3. The letter. The letter arrived folded too neatly, like it had practiced. Heavy paper, careful seal, no return address anyone would recognize unless they already knew what it meant. Cantor didn't touch it. Devin opened it himself at the kitchen table, between a cooling mug of tea and a charm that refused to hold its edge. The language was kind. That was the first problem. It thanked Devin Oakfor for his submission. It noted his scores, his aptitude assessments, the unusual consistency in his work. It said promising twice. once in the opening paragraph and once near the end, as if the word might mean something different the second time through. Then it did the thing all such letters do and moved the ground without announcing it. At this time, we are unable to offer you a place. We encourage you to continue your studies independently. Independently meant without access. Without materials he couldn't buy. Without teachers who didn't have to watch the clock. It meant the door had been acknowledged and closed in the same motion. Cantor read it after, standing, eyes flicking over the page like he already knew where it would land. He nodded once, the way a man confirms a weather report. "They don't take hedge kids unless someone vouches," he said. "And no one vouches unless you've already done the work somewhere they can see it." "Where?" Cantor hesitated, just long enough to count. Places that burn people out, places that prove things under pressure. That night, Devin searched until his eyes hurt. Buried forums, half-dead links. Names that didn't stay up for long. One name kept coming back, spelled 3 different ways, usually followed by a warning or a joke. Tiflis, or something like it. Someone had written beneath it, years ago. Counts as a feeder if you survive. 4. Tiflis. Tiflis didn't show up all at once. It surfaced in pieces, screenshots that went dead when you clicked them, references that assumed you already knew what they meant, jokes that only worked if you didn't ask follow-up questions. When Devin finally reached something that stayed open, it wasn't a homepage, so much as an apology for one. The site looked handmade on purpose. Margins that weren't straight. Fonts that leaned a little too hard into looking copied by hand. A note at the top, written like the writer expected to be interrupted. "We don't advertise. If you found us, you were already looking." There was no sign-up button, just a request. State what you can keep running. Devin hesitated, then typed something modest about repairs and recharging. He didn't mention the Warmstone talisman. He didn't know how to describe it yet. The reply came back faster than he expected, polite, warm, interested in the way people get when they think they've solved a small problem without making a fuss about it. "You won't need to perform. We value support work." There was a mention of coin, framed like a courtesy, to keep the rooms open, to keep things fair. Devin paid without feeling like he'd crossed a line. It felt closer to tipping than buying. Inside, the place was busier than the site suggested. Illusions layered over other illusions, some careful, some loud, some already slipping at the edges. People moved through it the way co-workers on different shifts move through a break room, trading nods, half-jokes, apologies for chairs they hadn't moved. Someone laughed near him and said something about the curse, the word tossed out the way people talk about weather they don't plan to change. "Once you start performing, you never really stop," a woman said, adjusting a glamour that flickered at the corner of her smile. A few people laughed. Someone else added, "That's just because it's easier than explaining gaps on a resume." Devin didn't laugh, but he didn't bristle either. The tone wasn't predatory, it was tired, practical. People here knew what they were doing, and they knew why they kept doing it, and those reasons didn't have to agree with each other to coexist. He found himself in a lower room after that, a place that felt like waiting. Regulars called the building the Tower. The lowest floor was where you went when you didn't know what you were yet. Screens paused, conversations idling, a few people checking the time the way you check a pulse. No one asked him to do anything. No one rushed him. Around him, the conversations had the cadence of things repeated. "You learn to pace it," someone said, like advice they'd given before. Helps them sleep, helps them explain why they're still here. And once, gently, from a man checking a clock and standing to leave. "You here to work, or you here to tell a story about yourself?" No one was talking to Devin. He understood that. He also understood that the room was the kind of room that taught you things sideways. That probably should have been the warning. 5. The talisman. They handed it to him like it didn't matter. A small thing. Old, flat metal, worn smooth at the edges. stamped once with a pattern that had lost its confidence over the years. The kind of talisman hedge mages used when they didn't want to admit they were hoping for more than they were paying for. Someone nearby said it was the sort they kept around for pests. Garden goblins, draft spirits, anything that liked to settle where it wasn't invited. "Careful," a man said, not looking at Devon. "Those'll bite back if you rush them." Another voice, casual. "Old mages use those when they're in trouble, when they can't afford to wait for help." Devon turned it over in his hands. It felt heavier than it should have, like it was remembering something. He waited for the part where he was supposed to focus, or brace, or feel the pull everyone talked about. None of that came. He just held it. The talisman filled. Not gradually, not in stages. It came awake all at once, the way a room light snaps on where no one had noticed the switch. Lines appeared that hadn't been there a second before. Fine, deliberate etchings threading themselves into place. A low hum settled into the air, steady enough to feel rather than hear. The temperature shifted, just enough that a few people rubbed their arms without realizing why. Someone laughed, then stopped. Devon waited for the drain, the recoil, the sharp edge everyone warned about. It never arrived. He felt exactly the same as he had a moment before, except that the talisman in his hands was very clearly done. More than done. It was running things he didn't recognize, functions the talisman hadn't reached in years. "That's enough," someone said, quickly this time. The talisman kept humming after Devon set it down, like it hadn't agreed to stop just because it was told to. An older mage took a step back, hand pressed to his chest, eyes wide in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with surprise. Devon looked around, suddenly aware that the room had gone very still. A presence he hadn't noticed before reached in and picked the talisman up carefully, like it might be offended by rough handling. The person didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked at the object once, then at Devon, and made a decision without announcing it. "Come with me." 6. No curse. The room they took him to didn't look important. That was the first thing Devon noticed. No banners, no sigils that announced themselves, just clean surfaces and objects placed where they were supposed to be. The way a workshop looks when someone has stopped pretending it's temporary. The person who'd brought him in was older than Devon had thought. Their hands had the same kind of marks Cantor's did, a small burn at the base of one thumb, ink under one nail that had been there long enough to become part of the cuticle. They sat on a stool worn into a shape only their body fit, and they set the talisman down on the part of the workbench they'd cleared in advance, like the spot had been waiting for it. "People like to call this place cursed," they said, working a bit of resin off their thumb. "It's a useful word. It keeps conversations short." Devon waited. He had the sense that filling the silence would count against him. "They say it because it's easier than admitting they've made a long string of small decisions, and not all of them with their eyes open." They glanced up. "Most of the performers here are preserving something. Youth, novelty, relevance. That takes energy. Personal energy. It runs out. So there isn't a curse." The authority considered that. "There's no spell, no binding, no appetite that we've ever found." They picked the talisman up again, turned it once. "You aren't preserving anything. You're not even supplying yourself." Devon felt a small, irrational flicker of pride. It was followed almost immediately by something colder. "You're sourcing," the authority went on, "cleanly, from somewhere that doesn't seem to mind." They set the talisman back down. "That's not common, and it's not something you learn." Devon thought of his father. The minute the world sees you can do something for free, it starts charging you for it. "What does it cost?" he said. "To be noticed by you?" The authority looked at him for a long moment. They didn't seem displeased. "That's the right question," they said. "It costs visibility. Once we know, others know. We don't keep secrets. We trade them too often for it to be efficient. The chapel will hear within the week. The badgers shortly after. The schools eventually, in their own time. And if I leave, You leave. We won't follow. We've watched people walk out of this room before. But the others, the ones you trade with. A small shrug. We don't control what they do. Devin nodded. He could feel his coat in his hand. He didn't remember picking it up. The room felt very ordinary. The authority watched him without expression. I should go home first, he said. The authority nodded once. The work will still be here. 7. The sentence. The kitchen smelled the same. That was the first thing. Boiled herbs and warm metal and whatever cheap solvent Cantor had been using that morning. The warm stone charm was on the bench where Cantor had left it, dim and quiet. Back to whatever state it had been in before Devin had ever picked it up. Cantor was at the table with another piece, a door charm with a hairline split running through one of the seals. He didn't look up when Devin came in. Devin sat across from him, without taking off his coat. They saw it, he said. Cantor didn't stop working. How many? A room. Then one person. The one person matters. Cantor nodded. He set the door charm down. He looked at the warm stone talisman, where it sat between them on the bench. Show me again. Devin picked it up. The talisman filled the way it had the first time. The same pressure shift. The same window opening somewhere in the house. Cantor watched it without expression. When Devin set it down, the hum took longer to leave than it had before. They want you, Cantor said. They didn't say want. They never do. Cantor wiped his hands on the rag. What did you tell them? That I wanted to come home first. That got a small nod. Maybe approval. Maybe just acknowledgement that the answer was reasonable. Do you go back? I don't know. Cantor was quiet for a while. He picked the door charm back up and worked the seal with a thin tool, the kind he used for old bindings that had to be eased open before they could be recut. His hands moved without him watching them. The cost of being seen by people like that, he said, isn't what they take. It's what they decide you are. He turned the door charm over. You go back. You're a boy who can do it for free. You don't go back. You're a boy who walked out. Either one is a story. They'll tell whichever one is most useful. What do I do? You do the work, whichever room. The work doesn't change. He didn't say anything else after that. The door charm took a small, reluctant edge under his hands. The kitchen smelled like solvent and tea, and somewhere outside a neighbor was shouting at a cat. Devin stayed for a few more days. He helped his father with 2 charms that had been sitting in the corner waiting for the kind of patience neither of them had had time for. He didn't try to fill anything else. The house held him the way the house had always held him, without asking, without comment. On the 4th morning, he picked up his coat again. Cantor was at the table. There'll be a second thing, he said, without looking up. There always is. What do you mean? The first ask is always the one they think they should make. The second is the one they actually wanted. He worked the tool gently. Pay attention to when it comes. And then? Then you decide. 8. What still runs? The authority was at the same workbench when Devin came back. They'd been expecting him within a window, it seemed. A stool had been set across from theirs, and the small workspace had been re-cleared in the days he'd been gone. They didn't ask about the trip. They didn't ask what he'd decided. They stood, picked up a key Devin hadn't seen the first time, and gestured him toward a door at the back of the room. It opened onto a space that read as storage only if you didn't know what you were looking at. Things were arranged carefully, dusted but not polished, labeled in a handwriting that assumed whoever read it would already understand the shorthand. Devin recognized the posture. This was where work went when no one wanted to explain why it had stopped. The authority walked ahead of him, touching nothing. These aren't broken, they're dormant. There's a difference. They stopped at the first piece, a ward assembly the size of a dining table, plates stacked and interlocked, etched with patterns that made Devin's eyes ache if he stared too long. It felt quiet the way a room feels when the power has gone out, but the wiring is still warm. This used to stabilize a border, not a dramatic one. Trade, mostly. Weather. Arguments that didn't need to escalate. A pause. We haven't been able to run it since before you were born. They didn't tell him what to do. They didn't have to. Devon stepped closer and placed his hand where it felt right, not where the diagram suggested, but where the thing itself seemed thinnest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the assembly woke, slow and steady, like something stretching after a long rest. The plates aligned. The hum returned, deeper than before, carrying weight without strain. The authority watched it come up. Whatever they had expected, this was it. They showed him another after that, then another. Smaller devices, larger ones. Some meant for crowds, some meant for places no one thought about until they failed. Each time it was the same. No recoil, no cost Devon could feel. Just the sense of a channel opening and closing politely, as if the universe itself were willing to be borrowed from as long as it was asked correctly. This is why places like this get watched, the authority said eventually. Not officially, but carefully. By the schools? By everyone. Badgers, the chapel, us. Anyone who needs proof instead of pedigree. They stopped near the door. The authority didn't quite look at him. There's a second piece, they said. A larger one. We'd like you to look at it before the others know what you can do. It would be useful to have a sense of your range before the conversations start. Devon felt it land. The first thing had been the dormant border. The second was range, before the conversations start. The first ask was the one they thought they should make. The second was the one they had wanted from the beginning. No, he said. The authority nodded once. They didn't argue. They didn't even seem disappointed. If anything, something around their shoulders settled, like the answer had been part of the test, and they'd seen it land before. All right, they said. Come back when you want to. Later, much later, he would leave again, then return, then leave again. Each time a little less ceremony involved. Each time the messages got shorter. Each time the door felt more like a door and less like an event. He would say no to other second things. He would say yes to a few. He would use the gift on his father's bench more often than on the dormant assemblies, and neither of them would discuss why. For now, he stood in the doorway with the hum of the border ward settling into place behind him, his phone lighting up in his pocket with a question that didn't need answering yet. You free next week? Once Upon a Tall Tale is a production of Static Oracle Press. All stories are presented as recovered from the archive of folk narrative. Names, places, and details have been preserved as catalogued. Their accuracy is the responsibility of the original source, not the press. Nothing in this episode is intended as a statement of fact about any living person, identifiable location, or actual event. Where a story resembles something real, that resemblance belongs to the story, not to us. Static Oracle Press. Systems, stories, signals.